Okay, some must-see new data coming in this morning, also overnight, that we're going to look at in this video as far as the snow and the ice and maybe the potential for some snow across parts of the Texas and maybe the Gulf Coast. It's still way early to talk about that, but we're going to look at these new details on the snow and where it's headed. That was the central part of the country. You could see that, but I think some of the most significant changes that we saw last night was getting some of the snow hopes up. We're right here across the Northeast. Now, this was the GFS ensembles that takes a variety of models and it puts it together and it gives you an average. This is where those ensembles this is what they were coming up with yesterday. Lighter amounts, and I said this in yesterday's video if you paid attention. I said I think the models are going to pick up on the heavier amounts as we get closer and there's more consensus. Well, we started to see that yesterday evening. This would be last night's midnight run of the GFS ensembles. It took quite a jog to the north, and so did the operational runs. So one has to wonder, are we putting snow closer to New York? My mind hasn't changed much. If you look at the newest ensemble data, it actually shifted back south. So don't get your hopes up just yet. The argument still is to keep most of the snow just to your south across New Jersey into D.C., at least the snow, sleet, freezing rain mix and the heaviest precipitation. Clearly, this is a situation that could change, but it's starting to narrow down quite a bit. Hey, if you're checking the video out for the first time today, guys, if I keep showing up in your YouTube video algorithm, I hope it means you enjoy this kind of content, and I hope you'll consider subscribing. Thanks to all of you who have done so. We've just flown through thousands of new subscribers over the last week, even 2 weeks. It's just been nuts. So thank you guys for subscribing. If you're brand new, you've never been over to the channel before, I'm Travis. Welcome. Thanks for coming by. I used to be a chief meteorologist on television years ago, and I tell folks, I got out of that business. Just wanted to do something different with my life, spend more time with my family. And I've been out of that business for over 5 years now. And I found myself looking at these types of models, so I started making videos about it. So if you like that content, come back. Now, some of these models have shifted up, but we are still looking at some very similar things. We're still looking at some heavy snow back here across the Ohio Valley. Some of that, arguably, if you look at the newest run for the 6Z, got a little bit tighter. But if you go back to yesterday's run, it might have been just a little bit further to the north. There might have been a slight southerly shift, but we're not going to fight over 30, 40 miles here. This will change. I promise you. As the model gets more data that comes in, as our storm moves in across the West Coast today, tonight, and into tomorrow, and once our storm actually forms, then I think you can focus in on exact details of how the snow is going to set up once those short-range models catch on to the idea of where the snow's headed. However, there's a lot of consensus. It continues to show the strong winter storm developing on the east side of the Rockies. As low pressure gets stronger here, you tap into that Gulf moisture and you've got the ice going from Kansas over to Missouri. Not a lot of this has changed. Arctic high pressure building in from the north, that cold, dense air undercutting that warm, humid air that's moving up from the Gulf. And now we're going to see freezing rain, sleet, and snow. We're going to get a little bit closer in just a second, but I want to let this system evolve and show you kind of what we're looking at. You're still seeing that heavy freezing rain across northern parts of Kentucky, southern Indiana, southern Illinois, parts of Missouri, and then eventually over into eastern Kentucky, southern West Virginia. The extreme southern part of West Virginia will likely warm up and change over to rain. The same could be said for parts of Tennessee and even into the mountains of North Carolina, where we started some freezing rain in southwest Virginia, and eventually that warm air erodes that cold air out. On the east side of the mountains, that cold air is a little more stubborn. The NAM is even picking up on that ice holding on even longer, which could happen. And I've been talking about that. I think that sometimes the models underdo that cold air damming effect. Eventually, it will change over to rain in these areas. Just for kicks, let's go over to the GFS, and I'm going to take you back to the midnight run, which got everybody all excited into the Northeast. Everything looks pretty similar here as it heads across the country, but a bit of a change as it heads to the Northeast. You can see this jog to the north a little bit here. Right, so now you're putting your heavy snow into central PA, pretty much all of New Jersey. Southern New Jersey actually goes over to a mix with a slight chance of heavy snow into New York City. That was the 0Z run. Now, I pay attention to the 0Z run, maybe a little closer than the 6Z run, which I say Zulu a lot. It's the GMT time, Zulu time. So let me just put it this way. This is the early Friday morning run, which doesn't use as much data. Last night's midnight run, which is a little easier to understand, so there you go, was a little bit further to the north. I think the trend still is for it to be south. I think that might be an outlier, but I'm paying attention, and I think a lot of folks in the Northeast are looking at this as well. The Canadian model also with a similar solution here. It keeps it further to the south. This is the latest run from it overnight. It takes the ice and the sleet and the snow right through the Kentucky, into Virginia, West Virginia, with the heavier snow on the north side of it, pretty much like everything else, and it keeps the heavier snow further south, kind of like the European. Let's pay attention to the NAM as it starts to get within its time frame that it's a little bit better. That's the North American model, and sometimes it does a better job at those finer details, which I think it's starting to pick up on some things, and it'll have, I believe, by this evening, a much better idea of what we're seeing across the Central Plains. Heavy snow across the west as our storm moves ashore. That's going to continue through today. Tonight, that snow moves into Montana, into Idaho, Wyoming, down into Colorado. Some of that snow could get heavy, and more snow across the Pacific Northwest as our storm takes shape across the Plain states. Let's track this out a little bit closer. You can get an idea of what you're going to see. The orange is sleet, the pink is freezing rain, and the blue is snow, and then rain on the southern side of that. There could be some severe weather, too, out ahead of this low as we get strengthening low pressure here across Oklahoma. Cold front getting drugged through the south. You know, this might arguably be a little bit further to the south on the NAM, a little bit, and it's also showing a little more ice, too. So that is going to eat into your snow totals, and I've talked about that over the last couple of days. Wherever you see mixing of precipitation, you're going to see a significant reduction in how much snow you see. I said this yesterday. I'm going to say it again. There will be a strong rip-off zone somewhere because the gradient of snow will be so tight as that Arctic air moves south into the storm. It's just, you're going to see that. That happens with these type of setups. I don't see it being any different here on the north side of this. On the southern side, you may go over to sleet or freezing rain, and that's just going to crush your snow totals. Now, across southern Indiana, southern Illinois, and Kentucky, again, the problem here will be the sleet, the freezing rain. The freezing rain clearly a huge problem when it comes to tree limbs and power lines. Problems with that, and there's also going to be wind here as well. Severe weather across the south has to be watched, and then now you've got the snow and the sleet and the mess just moving east. This is a closer look at the NAM that I was talking about, that cold air damming here along the east face of the mountains, pushing that cold air right up against the Appalachians as far south as North Georgia and the upstate of South Carolina. I think we started some freezing rain here. It's just, I've seen these historical storms move through. This is just the setup for that cold Arctic air bleeding in from the northeast, and you're also getting a transition over to freezing rain and sleet across Virginia. That would eat into some of the snow totals across northern Virginia. So the NAM is a little bit warmer, a little bit further to the north, and it's surging that warm nose of air in the mid-levels over top of that much colder air at the surface, stronger than the global models. Now, this is at the very end of the NAM's capabilities at 84 hours. It can be very untrustworthy out this far, but it's starting to sniff onto the idea that you're seeing more of an ice storm across a good chunk of Virginia. And I'm talking about really from the New River Valley east. Eventually that scours out and we turn over to rain. This is a closer look at the European. Not nearly as aggressive with the icing here across Virginia, keeping it mostly snow across northern Virginia into northern West Virginia. But you transition to rain again across far southwest Virginia. Southern West Virginia will start as ice, then we'll transition over to some rain and eventually from some freezing rain. And up towards Charleston, though, we may stay ice a little bit longer here over toward the Greenbrier Valley into northern West Virginia, sleet, over to heavy snow across the northern mountains of West Virginia. And then I think, again, that area right here along the West Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania border, we're going to see some heavy snow here. And the European continues to push that snow off to the east. Just for kicks, this is the early morning run of the European. It doesn't use as much data. It's still got that similar solution. Again, look, it's keeping the heavy bands of snow out of New York. Is there a chance? There is a chance, but I don't think it's a strong one just yet. This is a look at the GFS snow totals from early this morning. Last night's run clearly much further to the north on that. You know, I think in my mind, the European has a pretty good handle on where this is going as far as snow totals go. And it's a little bit further to the south. It's not pushing that heavy snow up into New York. However, the caveat will be the freezing rain and the sleet, which the NAM is really trying to mix you guys over here into a good chunk of Virginia, and that would drop these totals significantly here. All right, let's go back to the west. We'll look at the snow totals across northern West Virginia into Ohio. This is the European. It might be a little bit lighter looking than yesterday just because of the mixing that's expected. The new early morning European went a little bit further to the south. This was the one that ran right around what was just after midnight, early Friday morning. So you can see that snow still expected here across central Indiana up into Ohio. Not a lot of change here, so my mind still hasn't changed much. We're still going to get a heavy dump of snow here. The problem, again, could be if you mix over to some sleet. That would eat into those snow totals. Now, across Missouri, still thinking snow here. St. Louis, you're right on that line. You could be 3 inches of slop, or you could be a foot of snow, depending on what side of town you live on. And look at this, just a few miles makes a huge difference. So this is, again, the potential is super high for a ripoff for somebody if you're hoping for a big snow. On the north side of that, you go from 0.1 inch of snow here, somewhere here across southern Iowa. You pop across the border and you're at 15 inches of snow. Do you see the problem here? This is the NAM model. It's starting to dial in onto some of those details. This NAM model will take in much better data this evening, and I'm anticipating seeing that and seeing how it shifts these numbers up a little bit and the placement of the precipitation. And then across Kansas, we've been talking about that heavy snow for a while. Over to Kansas City, we're still looking at it at several inches of snow, 8 to 12, I think, at this point, with maybe some mixing over to some freezing rain, which here you go. It's going to be a problem. Up to 1/4 of an inch, maybe even close to 1/2 an inch. And even the ice as far west as the Colorado border, northern parts of Oklahoma could even start as some freezing rain. Further to the east, that ice continues across Missouri, southern Missouri, and I think right here along the Ohio River, that's the bullseye for the ice. The closer you are to the Ohio River, that's where the ice is going to be, and into Kentucky too. Kentucky, West Virginia, and the NAM again, picking up on that cold air, pushing that ice down into parts of North Carolina. So we could be looking at a significant icing event up along the face of the Blue Ridge Mountains here from Virginia down into North Carolina and then into eastern Virginia. An interesting look on the NAM, putting that freezing rain as far east as the Tidewater. We'll see how that shakes out in the next couple of runs. This is the early morning NAM. Last night's NAM, it was a little bit lighter on that ice, but still had the idea that we're going to push it all the way to the coast. Very interesting to see that pan out. And this is the European from last night. So this would be taking it out. It's a little bit colder again across northern Virginia, keeping you snow, but it also pushes that ice pretty far to the east. And it puts the idea of some ice into the Cumberland Plateau, which I don't think is outside the question. We could start as some ice here and then change over to rain, but it's got that core of heavy freezing rain across Kentucky, southern Indiana, southern Illinois, back into central and southern Missouri. Not a lot in my mind has changed here. Let's talk about the snow across Texas. Because look at this confidence starting to grow on the ensemble models. The ensembles, again, just use a variety of runs and combine things. And it's interesting to see these numbers growing. This almost this greenish color here. If you go down here to the key and look, that's a 30 to 40% chance of seeing more than an inch of snow. And now you've got that 10 to 20% chance almost to Houston. It's so close here. The odds are you won't see snow, but it's not a zero chance. Houston, actually, at this point, it is technically almost a zero chance, but north of town here, up towards San Antonio, you get up towards Austin, you get up towards Dallas, and into West Texas, a much better chance. At least it's growing here. And look, that extends over into Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, and off to the east, too, into parts of Alabama. Again, I would almost call it a non-zero chance. It's not really that high. If you were to take the GFS out and just look at it, because it has been the most bullish on bringing our snow to the east. Something of note, the European has held this upper low back to the west for this energy. The GFS today has trended to that idea. What does that mean? Well, that means you probably won't get a strong low as it moves across the Gulf. However, I still think you have something. It just holds it back a little bit longer, and look how the GFS is putting some heavy snow into Texas with heavy icing into parts of Louisiana, and it really blew it up last night. This morning's run, it's gone. So you see the problem here. So when you start to see different model runs this far out showing what I sometimes call fantasy storms like this, be very careful because it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to see it. But a much different look last night versus yesterday too. So again, I think that's why this far out, and you'll see it's one of the reasons I like to look at the ensemble data using a variety of averages. So you look at these deterministic runs, which are usually a yes, will it snow? No, will it not snow? I hope that's not confusing. I'm trying to show you the uncertainties here in these videos, and there's always a lot of uncertainty in weather. And a lot of folks will look at their weather app or their smartwatch, and they'll get the weather, and they'll say, oh, it says it's going to snow in 3 days, and then that goes away without knowing the certainty. And I can tell you, there's a lot of certainty that we're going to get a winter storm this week. Next week, I think the jury's out. Let's wait and see. I'll tell you one thing. The pattern is here for something. You've got this trough in the east, and we just stay active. So I think there are multiple chances for winter storms over the next several weeks. This is just the start, guys. Hold on, it's going to be a wild January. See you next time.